Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Over the last few days, China has demonstrated some very impressive military achievements. It's today the world's only country after the United States with two fifth-generation fighter aircraft in service. It's also demonstrated, believe it or not, two sixth-generation fighter aircraft, something that the world is yet to even field. Any air force in the world is yet to field. And China is in a military contest with the United States, of course. But it's also a direct threat to India, with whom it shares a contested boundary. Now, these fifth and sixth generation platforms could be sold to Pakistan as well. China has in the past transferred nuclear weapon blueprints and ballistic missiles to Pakistan. As the saying goes, there are no runners-up in conflict. Should India be worried? Clearly, yes, because this widening defense technology gap between India and China prompted three members of India's national security establishment to speak out yesterday. The Chief of the Air Force, Air Chief Marshal A.P. Singh, Defense Secretary Rajesh Kumar Singh, and Chairman DRDO Samir Kamath raised concerns at the state of play in the defense acquisition process. Now, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh said 2025 will be the year of reform. What reform does India need to urgently pursue to revitalize our national security setup? Joining me to discuss this are Air Marshal Deeptendra Chaudhary and Mr. Jayant Patil, member of the Executive Council at L&T. Air Marshal Chaudhary, I want to start by asking you this. The biggest gap between India and its two potential adversaries, China and Pakistan, appears to be in the air. Is the IAF able to meet its current operational requirements with the kind of platforms that it has? And if not, how do you balance defense indigenization and urgent operational requirements?
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you for having me over, and especially after like you mentioned, these three gentlemen who spoke about the future of Indian air power and defense industry, a very, very important aspect. And I'm glad on one aspect that there is a increase in realization on the asymmetry which has already occurred in our north against the northern adversary, that's China. Because China, I've mentioned this earlier also, and I've been writing about this, that the speed at which China has developed its air power is for a very clear reason. It knows that to push the US away from its first and second island chains in the South China Sea, East China Sea, and in the Taiwan region, it needs an offensive air power capability, which it did not have in the past. But it has strategically transformed its air force into an increasingly an offensive instrument of military power. And it has effectively used you can look at what it has done to Taiwan, the large formations which it flies. It has effectively neutralized the efficacy of the median line, which divides the Chinese and the Taiwanese airspace. So the point I'm trying to make is an offensive capability, increasing offensive capability of China, which will get enhanced with this advanced fighter generation platforms, which will increasingly now become the mainstay of our of inventory in Tibet, is a serious concern for us, because air power asymmetric advantage, which the Indian Air Force presently enjoys, which it did in Galwan and will probably do so for a very short while in the future, this asymmetric advantage is something which China recognizes, and it has bolstered its air power advantage, and it's increasingly doing so to deny us this advantage, asymmetric advantage. And we should be seriously concerned that if our offensive capability goes away against an adversary like China, where does it put us in our national security construct?
Right.
So the important thing here is that we need to buy our immediate needs,
Yes,
and well as simultaneously foster our Atmanirbharta for our long-term needs.
right. Absolutely. We need some immediate purchases for our urgent operational requirements, Air Marshal Chaudhary, as you mentioned. Mr. Patil, a few days back, we were in conversation, we were exactly talking about these very aspects that the three gentlemen just raised in that seminar yesterday. And I want to highlight what the Defense Secretary, Mr. Rajesh Kumar Singh said. He has commented on the timelines. Now, this is something that we've spoken about in the past, you've highlighted as well. And Mr. Singh says that the timelines that we have given ourselves to acquire platforms are too luxurious. Very basic things like preparing RFPs in time, even before going for the AONs, were not done. It's time to call a spade and have a different approach, he says. You know, there is a system of acquisitions. We possibly have one of the best acquisition systems in the world. Unfortunately, these don't acquire platforms for us in the timelines that are stated. Instead of months, we are actually end up acquiring platforms after decades. Now, the Defense Acquisition Procedure 2020 is up for review this year. What do you suggest the Defense Minister needs to do to urgently speed up the acquisition process? This has been a big bugbear of our system for several years now.
Sandeep, last time when we spoke about a week back, we had talked about this, review of the defense
Yes.
acquisition procedure. And the DAP procedure review now comes up exactly after 5 years, having learnt a lot of lessons
Yes.
in terms of what is right, what is working, what is not working.
Yes.
I date back in this sector when this was a classified document and not open to public. And those days, I remember the man who wrote it first
Yes.
had said that it was a 23-page document.
Right.
A 23-page document was drawn only to decide what the government possibly should not do, and it never said what the government should do.
Right.
Where the procedure has evolved
Yes.
after this large number of changes is people look for now in the procedure what is required to be done.
Yes.
And if what is to be done is not documented, then there is a crisis in terms of what is to be done, or lack of that knowledge of how exactly to process the case. While the basics are some of the negative things need not be done is what should be the genesis of any acquisition system.
Yes. Yes. What
On the
not to do
technical
rather
side.
than what to do. Yes.
Absolutely. What should not be done, because it's ultimately public money, and when it comes to public money, there has to be checks and balances. But at the same time, if the basics say something is right and
Yes.
right to be done in the interest of the country, then not making a decision actually turns out far more expensive, as we are
Yes.
seeing in the entire acquisition process implementation today.
Yes.
While the process says it should be done, anything which there is a clear timeline which are defined in the acquisition process, none of those timelines across the chain are met.
Yes, none of the timelines are met, and you have none other than the Defense Secretary himself saying that the timelines are too luxurious, which is obviously the time that it actually takes rather than the timeline that is noted. But Air Marshal Chaudhary, you want to come in on this then?
Yeah, I think Mr. Patil brought out a very valid point, and he referred to it earlier as well. And this is, I think, where the essence is. But I want to make one simple point here. One is an effort, and I mean, it is incredibly. I think it's probably a first that the Defense Secretary has come out on,
Yes.
and said openly, and which I'm immensely respectful because of the fact this is the first time when you can get things right only when you admit there's a problem.
Yes.
So, which is fantastic. But what is important is it's not just about timelines. It's also
Right.
about adhering to timelines. And this is exactly what Mr. Patil also mentioned.
Yes.
That we have never adhered. And please understand this, not only is this the customer, there are a whole lot of processes in between where every stakeholder, unless and until they adhere to their timelines laid
Yes.
down and are held accountable
Yeah.
for delays. Like, you can always delay the vendor.
Yes.
Which is already usually catered for. But how do you cater for delays which are self-created amongst the stakeholders in the process?
Bureaucratic delays.
So there must
yes.
be along the process.
Right. But coming back to what the Air Force Chief said, Air Marshal Chaudhary, he made a very valid point was the fact that, look, we ordered aircraft way back in the 90s or early 2000s, and we are yet to get the first 40 aircraft that we ordered for. And he's argued for creating competition so that there is some sense of urgency in this. Do you see a need for that? There is some, to some extent, the government has already started doing that. But can a country like India afford to, say, two parallel fighter aircraft making companies? You have HAL. Are you arguing for a second fighter aircraft manufacturer so that you have domestic competition?
I'll just take you back to when the F-16 was developed. It was called the YF-16, and along with
Yes.
it came the YF-17. So there were effectively two companies
Yes.
competition to produce a platform, knowing fully well that the US government, Air Force, would only take one.
Yeah.
But the beauty is, though the contract went to one company, the other company got inducted into the whole lot of contracts, subcontracts, which are
Yes.
sort of shared. So everybody wins. When you adhere to model which like for example the HAL, unless there has been never any pressure to deliver because of a sense of urgency from a national security perspective.
Right.
Because the user at this point in time has been an Indian Air Force, and there has been
Yes.
growing changes in threat appreciation in our region,
Right.
which needed change and improved air power capabilities.
Yes.
So unless the industry is sensitive to this, that
Right.
they are a part of the larger national security construct and they need to deliver in this manner. So that has not been there. And there has always been, now once you put out a platform or a model,
Yes.
you are stuck to that length.
Right.
And you are, trying your best to find reasons to push that through.
Right.
Rather than widen the basket. But it is easier said than done. How do you get a heavy hitter to the scale of HAL
Yes.
to compete? So there has to be strategic partnerships, to my mind. If you
Yes.
look at the naval model where the strategic submarine was made,
Yes.
it was made out of two
Right.
reasons. There was enormous engagement of the service, the Navy,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
retired naval community with the maritime industry
Yes.
in India. Whereas the aviation has been detached and taken away, and the Air Force has not been involved in it actively. I mean, we stopped
Right.
having chairmen long back.
Yes.
So unless and until you actively engage your main
Yes.
customer, so there are faults both sides. I mean, there are probably as many some shortcomings. It's not that I am aware of a fact that the Air Force has tried very hard to increase its engagement, but there has to be a welcoming approach from the industry as well.
Right.
So that is one aspect. Other is the naval model succeeded because of the extensive Russian strategic partnership.
Yes.
So these are the two which we really have to bear in mind, that when you want to bring a heavy hitter on board, then the government has to take the decision and who they want to give the responsibility.
Absolutely. Mr. Patil, as Air Marshal Chaudhary mentioned, what are the lessons that we can actually draw from our strategic submarine program, which, it's delivered a series of very complex defense platforms in about 2 decades. It's winding down to an end now, the program. But this is something that was pursued with an all-of-nation approach right from the top. Do you see a requirement for this to be replicated across other areas, like, for instance, the creation of a fifth generation fighter aircraft, or even something as basic as a jet engine, which we haven't been able to develop so far?
I think the basic principle, if we really were to take out of the strategic submarine program, it goes back long in time, but at that point in time, there was a clarity that it's going to be an indigenous.
Right.
And every technology that was needed was developed right in India through developmental contracts. Now, in Ministry of Defense acquisition, we don't have any process which truly supports this kind
Right.
of a development. And this is essentially where, along with the user, which Marshal Chaudhary said, we also need some of the flexible system which DRDO has.
Right.
Now, this is where you can't be standing on your own feet without building a muscle. A child,
Yes.
as a baby, starts crawling, keeps, all those games, or the way when it's lying down, keeps moving its legs all along. And those muscles actually help him stand and then run. And that's exactly the kind of a model we start looking at when some of these programs have happened indigenously. Every capability, right from fundamental raw materials to the equipment and then to the systems and building a platform have happened indigenously. Now, this is essentially where the long-term game actually makes all the difference, because a one contract partnership never works in the longer run, because
Right.
technology, one is development, second is improving it every day and day, virtually every day and night.
Yes.
Now, every subsequent platform as a result gains out of what has happened in the past, and the efficiency gains are shared, whether between the customer and the partner who the government starts looking at. And the sharing actually starts making that the learning curve benefits because of this continuity actually benefit both
Yes.
the user, the government, as well as the one who is building. And I
Right.
think this is a win-win-win three-way kind of a model, which is
Right.
what we see in the strategic submarine.
Right.
Now, take it to the any other kind of developmental domain. While on the initial stages, we may need, and I agree with Marshal Chowdhury, that in the aviation field, we certainly need some amount of support. But while we take that support to start with, we cannot not start our own developmental programs.
Right.
And those developmental programs, today there are far more evolved models which didn't exist in the earlier days
Yes.
of the DCPP and let's say DCPP,
Yes.
with some amount of choice. And that's where the strategic partnership certainly starts making an enormous sense.
Right.
So strategic partnership is all about I know who you are,
Yes.
you have certain capabilities, and as a result, I'm going to select you or shortlist few
Right.
rather than making it into an open tender situation. And then anybody wins, and then that anybody cannot take it forward.
Right. Could you just explain to our viewers this concept of strategic partnerships? It was introduced by Mr. Parikar when he was defense minister, but it never really took off. And I think there was a very clear roadmap on the kind of technologies that you wanted to acquire, which you didn't have indigenously, and you were going to get through foreign partners, foreign or even domestic partners. So what happened to this strategic partnership model, and do you believe that was actually the way forward?
To my mind, even today, it becomes extremely relevant for our decision makers to learn and actually study about it and start implementation process. At that point in time, it was possibly thought little more, I would say, call it outrageous, call it too forward looking kind of a thing. But
Yes.
now a decade has moved on.
Right.
The basic model talked of, anybody in the industry can say, I want to get into, call it an aircraft building or a fighter aircraft building kind of a program. The first phase, obviously, is then to see all those who are wanting to do that, do they have any knowledge, or what is the relevance in terms of their, call it track record, call it their technologies, call it their mindset to involve into technologies and doing the developments, and along with it, the muscle. If something goes wrong for a couple of years in a program, the muscle
Yes.
to stay and actually drive a program through that.
Right.
Now, this is where the first stage of selection, which essentially would say if an aircraft building takes 100 kind of measurable units of competence, if somebody has 70, somebody has 50, somebody has 40, whom do I select? Now,
Right.
this is essentially the best suitable in terms of, call it muscle, call it technical competence, and those kind of things. A combination need to be looked at to be able to decide who's the partner which the government now starts working with.
Right.
And Manohar Parikar's model was, I now work with this partner on my side of the table to start talking to this foreign company who I want my strategic partner. My internal strategic partner is with me. Now the technology player who comes from outside, I
Yes.
will sit together and I will then debate, if not this country or this company out of the external world, the other one will come and give me more and more indigenization, because I start from a position of strength, that
Yes.
I have a partner who knows 70% of it, and with that 70, I need to do only the balance 30.
Right.
Now, this is essentially where the competence can be grabbed and gathered far, far faster. And this is essentially where, having gone through some amount of that pain in the early stages, the
Yes.
subsequent development and delivery starts becoming meaningful.
Right, absolutely. And in fact, it's a pity that that model was never explored, and it's been a decade now. And obviously, things have moved on since then. But M. Ashal Chaudhary, now we are in 2024, and things are getting critical from the way the defense experts mentioned yesterday. The members of the defense establishment spoke out. What are the critical technologies that we must focus on going forward in the next decade or so, which we cannot do without? Two or three of these critical technologies we must go hell for leather to acquire in the next couple of years.
First thing I would put across on this, Sandeep, is that in our indigenous industry, we need to take a hard look at the assembly line and its production capabilities.
Right.
Atmanirbharta, for example, especially from fighter production capability, with your neighbors producing about 100 aircraft a year, and if we are struggling with 6 to 8 in a year,
Right.
we don't stand it in hell. So the question is, do we have advanced processes? Do we have digital design, digital machining? All these, because these needs huge investment by the company. So if you want to bring in a new player, it's very difficult for him to get into this kind of a thing. So this is something we need to explore, is that we need to fast track, get our processes right, not just
Right.
administrative and financial procedures right, the delivery and the production procedures.
Right.
And that is a very critical aspect. Another thing which I would want to bring out is, like I was talking about in terms of technology and capability, I think fifth generation, if we still look at fifth generation, we'll be in trouble, because we are already a generation behind. Possibly
Yes.
the AMCA model has looked at it more strategically to properly jump across into the sixth generation. Easier said than done.
Right.
Much difficult given the disadvantage and in terms of starting timelines that we have. So that is one aspect we need to bear in mind. But other thing which I want to put across is here is fighter production capability is something you'll have to get into as a long-term strategy
Yes.
and start now.
Yes.
But don't wait. Let your capability and capacity come to a vulnerable point where it impacts your deterrence and national security.
Right.
So cover that with immediate purchases, but
Yes.
set in a long-term strategy. Now this is important, what I'm trying to bring out. If AMCA be our long-term goal,
Yes.
then on it, but that shouldn't be the only focus from air power perspective. There are other areas of design in terms of missiles. We are
Right.
we are a country which has produced enormous capabilities,
Yes.
seeker heads, advanced missiles, advanced air defense systems. And I'll flag something very important here. Today, you will have to fuse the air and the space domains into
Yes.
an aerospace domain awareness. I know
Yes.
the CDS speaks about the air domain awareness, and that's an important thing. But I think we need to migrate to an aerospace domain awareness. Now, this
Yes.
talks about networking, sensors across the air and space domain. Very difficult. Now, this is an area we should start investing and researching right now.
Absolutely.
Aerospace defense.
Right.
Your aerial threats are no longer going to use the atmosphere. They're going to probably come
Coming
in
from space. Absolutely.
So expand into aerospace defense.
Aerospace
Now,
defense. Yes.
These are niche areas where the Air Force and the Indian military ecosystem, which are truly forward-looking, where we need to make. So we shouldn't. This is something we need to sort of pin our.
Yes.
What should I pin our stakes on and push for?
Absolutely.
Which will set.
Great, good points, Marshal Chaudhary. Processes, we need to improve our processes and we need to build up on our aerospace capabilities. Mr. Patil, what is your two items on your wish list based on what we are seeing around us now with China, ramping up its technology advantage over India? What do you think we need to do in the next couple of years urgently?
First and fundamental point, the leadership in government needs to start trusting,
Yes.
besides public sector, the private sector.
Right.
And when I say that, when we start looking at single party acquisition, it happens normally
Yes.
with a PSU. It doesn't happen with the private sector. Cycle times, obviously for acquisition, when it comes to PSU private as a comparison, an analysis will show the truth in terms of how we go about.
Yes.
2014 onwards, or even 2011 onwards,
Yes.
there have been multiple statements that there will be competition and there would be no nomination.
A level
While
playing
we
field
need to
between
time
private
on
and public.
knowledge
Absolutely, Mr. Patel. Next, we're
and,
completely out
and
of time.
technology aspect.
Yes, and but the second point that you mentioned, what we must do quickly, is it in terms of technology or processes, systems?
Focus on technologies more and more. We cannot do an aircraft without an engine.
Absolutely.
And if to do an engine, it is going to take nothing less than 10 years and some amount of money. We
Right.
must have freedom to put that.
Right, absolutely. We need money, we need technologies, we need to trust the private sector even more. Great suggestions coming out of two of India's foremost defense experts while we are commenting on the defense warning that have been raised by three members of India's national security establishment. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the 9 p.m. show. President-elect Donald Trump will be sworn in less than a fortnight from now. As president, some years ago, Trump was accused of being isolationist in his first term. In his second term, he seems to be pursuing what can be called an expansionist agenda. Just yesterday, he laid claim to Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal. He's even put out a map of what the United States would look like after the acquisition of Canada, which he calls the 51st state of the US. Why is President Trump doing this? Why is the United States increasingly beginning to look like the expanding states of America? Joining me to discuss this are Commodore Uday Bhaskar, Captain Naveen Singhal, and Pathikrit Pen. Gentlemen, welcome to the News 9 Plus show. Commodore Bhaskar, these are unprecedented times. I cannot think of another time when an incoming US president signaled territorial conquest. Are we looking at some kind of a Monroe Doctrine on steroids under President Trump?
I think, Sandeep, what we are witnessing in the run-up to January 20th can be described as the beginning of the Trump turbulence.
Yes.
There is malice, there is mischief, and more in terms of how I think President-elect Donald Trump has rattled the global system.
Right.
Because if you look at the commentary that has followed these statements of his, and the fact that he has sent his son off to Greenland,
Yes.
Donald Trump Jr.,
Yes.
with all those statements that are flooding social media and in America on networks, the critics of Trump have called this insane.
Right.
They said, are we going to see 4 years of this kind of madness? That's a word that's
Right.
been used. On the other hand, interestingly, and I think this is something we might want to discuss a little more objectively,
Yes.
there are some people within the right wing and ostensibly from the strategic community who are talking about Trump doing something totally out of the box,
Right.
which is to identify US strategic and security objectives in
Yes.
relation to what he claims is the expansionism of first China,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to the Panama Canal, though mind you, some of his statements are
Yeah.
not factual. Or for that matter, Greenland, which has got a certain locus when we look at global warming and the possibility
Yes.
that there would be a different kind of shipping protocol, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to draw attention to is that there is a very interesting kind of dynamic within the United States,
Yes.
which is talking about the need for the president of the US to take stock of the Western Hemisphere and go back, as you rightly pointed out, to something that resembles the Monroe Doctrine
Right.
in the 21st century. But mind you, this is not binary. This is Donald Trump at his very best.
Right.
And there are all kinds of other issues. But for now, he has rattled the international system. And it will be interesting to see what will be the response of capitals like Beijing
Right.
and Russia, which have long been accused by Washington
Yes.
of following an agenda that, as you rightly described, is totally expansionist and at one level insane.
Expansionist indeed, Commodore Bhaskar. Pathikrit Pain, I'm going to ask you about, the import of all of these statements that President Trump is making. Trump is being regarded as a deal maker. And finally, he settles for a deal. Do you think this is a maximalist position that he's taking with Canada, the Panama Canal in Panama, and of course Greenland? The fact that he threatens them and then he extracts concessions out of them. Do you believe that is the case, or is it something that he genuinely wants to expand the United States of America into multiple states beyond just the number 50?
So, Sandeep, there are two aspects to it. Number one, it's not that suddenly Trump has started loving the people of Canada. It's not like that. It's just that he needs access to the Arctic Circle. If you look at
Right.
it, there are 19 operational bases that Russia has in the Arctic region.
Yes.
And the sovereign rights next to that of Russia in the Arctic Circle is that of Canada. Yes, you may say Alaska is there, but it has a very limited presence in terms of access to that region.
Yes.
And of course, the other part is Greenland. So whether it's Greenland, whether it is Canada, it is purely for the sake of number one, the Arctic region, which
Yes.
is considered to be a massive untapped repository of oil and gas, and that's why
Yes.
Trump has always cared two hoots about these climate change issues.
Right.
So let me tell you the other thing. There's a method in this madness. I'll tell you the
Right.
reason. Number one, Canada has always been like the vassal state and the de facto 51st state of United States.
Yes.
If you actually stay in the southern states of provinces of Canada, from Alberta to British Columbia to Quebec, you can actually drive down to United States, work
Yes.
and come back.
Yes.
So the problem for the incoming Prime Minister of Canada, or even for Trudeau, and which is why he was avoiding it, that the next election of Canada can actually be in, say,
Right.
probably in 2030,
Yes.
as electing the next president of United States as the 51st state. Reason is, if tomorrow Trump gives this offer to the
Yes.
white Canadians, or
Yes.
say Canadians, you tell me how many white Canadians predominantly will find it difficult to accept. They will
Right.
actually be very happy to be part of Canada, to be
Right.
part of United States. So the problem for Canada today is that it's like the object looking closer than they appear in the mirror of the car.
Yes.
It is the Canadians themselves who would be more than happy to be part of United States than somebody else.
Yes, possibly,
And
and
let
there
me
would
tell
be
you-
calls for a referendum there in Canada. Who knows, Pathikrit,
Exactly.
the way things are headed.
Exactly.
But the point that you made, Pathikrit, very valid about the Arctic. It's all about the Arctic Circle and the fact that climate change is creating unintended consequences, opening up passages that were inaccessible to shipping for several centuries. And Captain Singhal joins us now. He's a shipping expert based in Singapore. Captain Singhal, we've been talking about the Arctic, the Northern Passage being opened up, and Russia taking a lead in capitalizing on the Northern Passage. Explain to us why you think there is a method in Donald Trump's madness, the fact that all of these are linked to actually shipping passages, whether it is the Panama Canal, whether it's Greenland, or it's finally Canada and the access it has to the Arctic Circle.
Hi, Sandeep. Thanks for having me here. So the Arctic passage. There are two entrances from the Atlantic Ocean, and one is between the Greenland and Norway, so you can get into the Arctic from there. Then there's another between Greenland and the Baffin Islands, and that's in the Canada, so you can enter from there as well. So if you enter from there, then you can actually go right through across and exit from the entrance of the Pacific side. The Pacific side entrance is between the Russian and the Alaskan border.
Right.
So what I think his claim on Greenland and the Iceland, because Iceland is very close to the second passage, which is between Greenland and Norway.
Right.
So he's looking at that, and the other passage is Greenland. So I think he wants to sort of get a hold on this Arctic passage, which is hugging the Canadian coastline. Because
Right.
the Russian side is being dominated by Russia, and they've been there for decades out there. So they've been flying ships. So for them, that passage is not new. So that's dominated by Russians. The pilot service out there, every ship passing through that, because that's the passage is currently being used by merchant ships to go from, let's say, Far East to, the European side. Although that's not so frequent, you get something like 30, 40 transits a year. But the number of ships has been increasing. When you talk about the unique ships, so there have been about 1,700, approximately 1,700 new ships which have crossed till about 2023.
Right.
And this is increasing. It's the last year, I think the percentage increase was over 37%.
So this
I
this
think
is
he
happening,
wants to-
Captain Singhal, as the ice flows start melting, you have icebergs shrinking, and
Yeah.
that's opening up the passage to merchant shipping, and that's what's happening right now.
No, not really. There are two things. Now, in the month of September is the best month for transiting in that passage. So in the month of September, roughly about 50% or 60% of the entire traffic crosses the, this particular Arctic region. The remaining 40% is to the rest of the year. So they use icebreakers, and
Yes.
there is to escort them, and because otherwise they can get stranded when there's a lot of ice, or the ships can just get stranded. Also, the class of ships, the ships transiting the Arctic have to
Yes.
have a certain ice class, so they to transit that. So the transits are there. So you say something like 35, 40 transits a year,
Yes.
and of which merchant ships, which includes cruise vessels also.
Right.
So that's the traffic moving right now, but it's likely to increase because it is increasing at about 30-40% each year.
Right.
Because there's a lot of money saving out there. There's a lot of time
Yes.
saving when you go, particularly from Far East to Europe. There's a
Yes.
very significant amount of saving out
Right.
there.
Something like
It's like when I
40%
use sailing.
is what you were saying, that
Yes,
it saves around
40%.
40%. That's a huge saving, and that possibly indicates why he would want the US to have a competitive advantage when it comes there. But Commodore Uday Bhaskar, the fact that President-elect Trump also mentioned something about the Russia-Ukraine war, where he says he understood the grounds for why Russia invaded Ukraine. And he spoke about this theory of the eastward expansion of NATO, which is being cited by Russia as one of the casus bellis for the war in 2022. Do you see this as some kind of peace settlement in the offing with the Russian Federation, and also the fact that he's possibly trying to drive a wedge between the Russian Federation and China?
Yeah, I think when he was Mr. Donald Trump and a candidate and on the
Yes.
campaign, he had made some what you might call as typically Trump-like statements that he would be able to solve the war in Ukraine
Right.
in a very short span of time. Now, after he became president-elect, you could see that he has got around him a team of advisors, some of whom I think in a way subscribe to what you might call as the Mearsheimer argument. You may be
Yes.
familiar with Professor John Mearsheimer, who has been one of the voices in American academia, which has tried to project this case from Moscow's perspective, and that NATO, led by the United States, is actually guilty of breach of promise when
Yes.
NATO expanded eastwards and thereby raised the anxiety in Moscow. There's a whole argument and a narrative about that. And what you see is that now, as president-elect, he's putting out certain statements, signals in the hope that he would be able to make this more malleable.
Yes.
And interestingly, the Russian president, Mr. Putin, Vladimir Putin, has also responded, saying that when Mr. Trump takes office, he would be open to some kind of a negotiation or at least a dialogue. Now, this
Right.
is where we go back to the point that you flagged fairly early on about Trump, the deal maker.
Yes.
Is he raising the stakes? It's a
Yes.
bit like trying to play a game of poker
Yes.
and see if you can outwit your adversary or opponent by making certain moves on the game, as it were.
Yes.
So I think when it comes to the Ukraine war, the immediate suggestion is that he wants to make it more malleable,
Right.
which it was not, because if you remember the Biden presidency,
Yes.
everything that the United States was doing was binary, which
Yes.
is that Russia is the aggressor, Ukraine is the victim,
Yes.
we will send more aid, NATO will be up there, and so on and so forth. Much of what the president-elect Mr. Trump has now done is also to create a lot of anxiety in NATO.
Yes.
I mean, Denmark, which claims Greenland.
One of the founding members
Canada.
of NATO. I was going to ask you that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Are you going to take up, enter into a kind of confrontation with core NATO members over territoriality? I mean,
Right.
Trump is driving a truck through international law.
Yes.
What will happen at the end of this crash, we are not quite sure.
Right.
But there's going to be a lot of pushback. And I just want to add a quick line to that earlier statement. I
Yes.
don't think Canadians are going to be very happy about becoming part of the United States. I mean, I have my own views on that. Whatever
Yes.
little bit I've seen, there are many Canadians who are not enthused with the suggestion. They see Donald Trump as a bore, as a
Yes.
bully. But I
Right.
think we'll see more of that as we go ahead.
We'll see more
Sandeep?
of that as we go ahead, Commodore Uday Bhaskar. Particularly, closing comments from you. This Trump's maximalist position, as Commodore Uday Bhaskar said, he's driving a truck through international relations, particularly NATO, which Denmark, of course, is one of the founding members of NATO, and Canada is too. is he actually going to declare war on NATO members? If that's what it comes down to. And here you have to see what Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said about this, where he said that it doesn't have a snowball's chance. Canada doesn't have he doesn't have a snowball's chance of taking over Canada and making it the 51st state of the United States. Patikrit.
So Sandeep, it's like either you take the 25% tariff or you be part of United States. Now
Right.
the referendum will make it clear. Secondly, see, NATO itself has never been very law-abiding. Most of the conflicts they have got into, it has nothing to do with, fighting for democracy that they actually preach.
Right.
Issue is this: if the ultimate objective of the Russian war was to expand, for military-industrial complex to have its own purpose and to get the access to the Arctic, I mean, Trump is doing the same thing without any war and taking over Canada.
Yes.
The other issue is NATO itself is dependent on American money predominantly. So Trump
Yes.
will make it very clear. You want to continue with NATO, you continue on your own. I am not
Right.
interested in that. In that case, the very existence of NATO and European Union tomorrow, it will be in very much of a problem.
Yes.
See, the whole Russia-Ukraine war has nothing to do with Ukraine. The day the supply war stops, Ukraine finishes off. So, it's like, transactional, as you rightly mentioned. Trump takes over Canada, possibly trying that way. Russia remains silent on that. Russia takes half of Ukraine as a buffer zone. And
Yes.
we don't know what the deal will be between between China and Taiwan and what they'll discuss. So essentially, NATO and Europe, which was thinking that we rule the world, suddenly will find that they have nobody will ask to what they believe in or they decide. So ultimately, NATO has its numbers, days in, few days left. Basically, that's the desperation you see right now. Ukraine trying to have a 9/11 kind of attack in Kazan city of Russia, trying
Yes.
to ensure that somehow Russia retaliates and the war extends, which
Yes.
I think the Russians are not taking that bait right now. Whether the Canadians take that bait or not, well, we have to see. But
We'll have
most
to
of the
see.
Canadians will find, that-
We're completely out of time, gentlemen, but thank you very much for joining us. And as Commodore Bhaskar mentioned, that Trump is driving a truck through international relations. He's always done that in his first term, and his second term promises to offer more of the same. And that's what we're talking about here, Trump's maximalist agenda to expand the United States beyond its boundaries of the 50 states. Thank you very much, gentlemen.